I'm Greg Hunter. Welcome to USAWatchdog.com. With us, a guest that we've had on before who was quite popular. He's a big-time Wall Street analyst, and he's a big picture, big thinking guy. And let me just give you just a few of the many calls he has made in the past. Back in 2001, he said, buy gold. Gold was trading for high 200s, low 300s back in 2001. He said, go out and buy yourself some gold. Back in 2004, he said the government would be spying on people. Before that, a year before that, 2003, he predicted that there'd be a big, giant, mortgage crash, and then there'd be QE after that. In 2010, he said that the Chinese would start exiting their long-dated U.S. securities. True. These are all things that have happened, folks. He also said on this show in 2014 that next big war is coming, and it's not going to be with who you think, Russia. It's going to be with China. We're going to talk about that. And also, he is predicting a political crisis. I want to bring on Warren Pollock, big thinking guy. Warren Pollock, thank you for joining us today from New York.
It's great to be here, Greg.
Listen, I've said in the past, you come on because you want to tell people, what you think and warn them about the things that are coming down. You don't have anything to sell. You don't have a website. I think this is wonderful. We'll have a link, a PowerPoint link at the end of this presentation. We're not going to get everything in because you've done a great job. I can tell you're a big-time Wall Street analyst. But I want to start with, just the most topical thing last week. Woohoo, we got this big victory. That they're not going to do any more bulk metadata collection, but they just made legal what was illegal. They get to record the calls. They get to know what your financial information is. They just made it legal, didn't they?
Sure, and basically we're in a position right now in the United States where there is absolutely no law. So you and I know right now that there's an economic crisis which is still operable from 2007, 2008. And I was able to see that was going to occur in 2003. But what's going to come next, because of the abrogation of law, because law doesn't mean anything anymore, what we're going to have in the United States shortly is something called a political crisis. And the political crisis isn't something that anyone else has seen. We can only sort of glimpse into what a political crisis is through maybe two past events. The first was the Cuban Missile Crisis. And in order to see a political crisis, we have to look at it from the Soviet point of view. And what happened was, during the heat of the Cuban Missile Crisis, the U.S. was unclear as to who was in charge of the Soviet Union. So the U.S. was trying to negotiate back and forth with the Soviet Union, but there wasn't really an understanding whether or not the leadership of the Soviet Union was in place, whether or not who exactly was in charge, who has their finger on the nuclear trigger. That was uncertain, and that's what a political crisis is. Another example of political crisis was the shooting of Ronald Reagan. And for a day in the United States, there was a political crisis. We had Alexander Haig on the TV saying that he was in charge of the country. There were people grabbing for power. Foreign powers thought that maybe there was a coup d'etat in the United States, and no one really knew who was in charge. So when I'm talking to you back and forth about
but that only happened for a day. I remember that, Alexander Haig saying he was in charge. I thought, what happened to the vice president? And he was inaccessible. But Haig said, I'm in charge.
Right, but that's an example of a political crisis. And when I'm talking about things, in 2003, that we're going to have a mortgage-backed securities crisis and that we're going to have QE occurring thereafter, or when I'm on Max Kaiser and I say there's going to be a bank holiday and the next week there's a bank holiday in Cyprus, people don't understand what's going to occur because they haven't seen it before. And this political crisis is something which people have not really seen before, and especially they've not seen it in the United States. Even though the U.S. doesn't have law right now and there's prolific NSA spying, there is still a semblance of normalcy in the United States. People think that the Senate and the Congress still work, the president is in charge, the Supreme Court is operable, but really behind the scenes, Who knows what's going on? And in a crisis situation, let's say there's some sort of ship sunk by China or in the Middle East or elsewhere, or someone's assassinated in the government, or there's an economic crisis or hurricane or some other event, it's going to be enough to put the U.S. into a political crisis. And it's not just going to happen for a day. Instead, this political crisis is going to be operable for weeks, months, years. And it's going to create uncertainty in the U.S. and uncertainty abroad. And people won't know who's in charge. And in the background, we'll have, let's say, U.S. government agencies trying to become in charge. We'll see maybe people in the military trying to be in charge. We'll see different congressmen or senators grabbing for power. And you see some of that occurring right now. There's really a leadership vacuum in the U.S. Now, on your show, I talked about the fact that the government is right now inverted. It's inverted totalitarianism. And from an accountability standpoint, we can't point to someone and say, you're really to blame for the lawless situation. You're really to blame because we're approaching a war in the Middle East or with China or with Russia. The same thing happens in crisis, in a political crisis. This sort of unstructured government comes back to haunt the halls of power. And that's where political crisis occurs. It's a realization that nobody's in charge, really.
Yeah, I want to bring up one of the points you made. I want to get into this. You think war, you were predicting war is coming. You did this last show. You're saying this time, but not with who you think. And between the last time you were on and this time, we had this meeting, and not a lot of press happened with it, and not a lot of people know. I don't know. I'm speculating. But all of a sudden, Secretary of State John Kerry flies to Sochi, Russia, and has a face-to-face meeting with Vladimir Putin. I'm thinking, after all this nastiness in Ukraine and these sanctions and all this stuff, what in the world are they talking about? And then all of a sudden it hit me, they're probably talking about China. Because Russia and China have been huge enemies in the past, huge. So they've signed these deals, these trade deals, and you're saying that ain't going to happen. China's going to try to expand into what is now the vast expanse of eastern Russia and push Russia back. China is going to expand big time into the South China Sea. That's going to be the big problem. This is a nutshell. Could you go into that for me?
Well, sure. I mean, if you think about the United States, you sort of taught in high school history about this term called manifest destiny. And that's sort of a U.S.-centric history where the U.S. has a manifest destiny to be ever present from the East Coast to the West Coast. That's sort of our ethos. We have a God-given right to dominate North America. China has a manifest destiny too. And what's going on in the South China Sea is their manifest destiny. And they see right now two things. They see the U.S. as a blocking force to their manifest destiny, as a tiger that's sort of in the background, and they see Japan as being Nazi Germany. Japan is heinous, despicable, because they occupied Manchuria and caused just a tremendous devastation in Manchuria, killing people, putting them in ditches, and that's what China remembers. And sort of standing between China and its manifest destiny is the U.S., and the U.S. dog is North Korea and also Japan. So this is the way that we're sort of being viewed. It's a Chinese manifest.
They want to take over South Korea. They want to take over North Korea, China.
Well, with North Korea, I mean, we think in the news that North Korea is this tremendously dangerous rogue state, but really it's a destitute state of 20 million people. And what it is really a buffer state between China and Japan, the United States. It's sort of neutral territory, a demilitarized zone. All of Korea, that's the purpose of it. And when the U.S. even armed South Korea, they put limiters on the missiles so that the missiles that we gave South Korea couldn't hit the Chinese mainland. So South Korea only has the right to defend itself. And when you look at the map of China, what it used to be, really North Korea isn't, and North Korea was maybe part of the Chinese Empire past. South Korea was maybe part of the Mongolian Empire, but not the Chinese Empire. But what it is the key to the lock which allows China to exercise its manifest destiny. And in the presentation which I gave you, I showed you specific points on the map which are of paramount importance to China dominating the world. And you could see down in South Korea, the two areas where they build ships, and off to the side a little bit is Nagasaki, Japan, the place where the A-bomb exploded, the second A-bomb. And that's where most of the world's shipbuilding capacity is. And it's really a land route that China could use right up into Japan. And on the map, which I provided in the presentation, I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and it sort of lays out the path that China would take to exercise its will to have a manifest destiny over the South China Sea. So everyone now in the news, we look at Korea, we look at the South China Sea, but the real thing is saying, what's Chinese relationship with Japan, and is the U.S. in the way of manifest destiny?
And they are, and let's just shoot it right back around to that meeting between Kerry and Putin. Why this, all of a sudden they had to go meet with Kerry, and Kerry had to meet Putin. Is that because Kerry's over there telling, hey, listen, they're eventually going to attack you. They're going to attack you. They're going to, just like before, they're going to attack you in the east, and they're going to take over a large chunk of Russia. Is that what you're saying that meeting could have been about?
Well, I don't know what that meeting was about because I wasn't there, but what I can tell you is that there are background realignments between countries that I've outlined in the presentation that people really aren't aware of. And these relationships are radically going to change the way that we view relationships. So last time that I was on your show, I was saying that Russia, in the news, was saying that Russia's the enemy, and I said, no, China's going to be the enemy. And then we have Kerry, let's say, going off to Russia, and then all of a sudden Russia is our best friend. And that's because the world is arranging itself into different spheres of influence, different blocks, and it's going to, in the U.S. political crisis, these blocks are going to start to emerge and become more visible. Imagine the U.S.
Stop for just a minute. When's the political crisis? We're entering the political crisis now. We're already in the economic crisis.
Right. We're already in the economic crisis. We're entering the political crisis right now. And the people that you're going to see who are, quote, running for president, they're going to be the worst of the worst on the Democratic side and on the Republican side. And these people couldn't, a single one of them couldn't generate an ounce of support from the people of the United States or an ounce of respect from the people worldwide. So this idea of inverted totalitarianism where no one is in charge and thus no one is held accountable becomes realized, because now the world realizes that no one is in charge of the United States, that it's absolutely leaderless. And it's going to cause countries like the Philippines right now to go absolutely nuts. Philippines, Vietnam, Russia, India, Japan, these countries are quaking in their shoes that China has a manifest destiny. And on the other side, we see Pakistan, the leadership of Saudi Arabia, Turkey, Malaysia, Indonesia, Cambodia. They're going to sort of align into this sphere. And why don't we call them the allies? And why don't we call the U.S. group the Axis? Because good and evil is something that's relative. We're used to viewing the world through the U.S. manifest destiny. But what if that was turned around? What if the U.S. was the bad guy? And then what do a lot of countries do that are, let's say, Brazil, Chile, Singapore, or parts of Africa? Who do they align with to provide resources to? Brazil was given a lot of money by China. Chile, a lot of money by China. Singapore, well, where are they geographically? Are they going to support the U.S. or China? And then what's going to happen is as the U.S. becomes politically unstable, we're going to see in Europe sort of civil war in some places, total turmoil internally in countries such as France, Spain, UK.
It has to do with Islam, right?
Greece. A lot of countries are going to be just booting Islam out of their nations. Specifically, Germany is going to go and look at all the Turkish people that are in Germany. They're going to be expelled. There's going to be Nordic anti-Islamic movements In Russia, it's going to be a recurring problem with Islam in the Caucasus and Georgia regions. And that's all because of this political crisis. Because the U.S. is viewed as a unilateral power in the world. And when the emperor has no clothes, all of these different instabilities are going to hatch out. And you're going to see the economic crisis become a crisis of law, and then a political crisis, and that's when these background realignments and collapse occurs in some of these peripheral countries.
The economic crisis, the crisis of law. I mean, they just the most recent one, the banks, some of the big banks, admitted to criminal rigging of the interest rate market. They already admitted to rigging the LIBOR market. They rigged the stock market, the bond market, the gold market, the silver market, the housing market, the interest rate market. They rig all the markets. I mean, and then they get fines, and they guess they ratcheted up this last time. And now we find out about this FIFA story.
Exactly.
And which is bogus, except for this. The banks allegedly were laundering the money for FIFA.
Well, yeah,
I mean, it's lawless. I mean, nobody goes to jail. I mean, I will say one thing about one of the candidates, O'Malley, from the governor who stepped in against the Democratic side, says, you can get pulled over for a broken taillight, but the guys that, ripped off trillions of dollars, is paraphrasing, ripped off trillions of dollars, nobody goes to jail. I'm like, bing, 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 bing. Yeah, we have this huge crisis in law. In near term, a lot of folks that I've talked to say that if there's a perfect storm of that's happening for this fall. We just had the first quarter come in negative, and a lot of people say the first 2 quarters will be negative, we'll be in a recession, and the thing is spiraling down, and either they're going to overtly or covertly start, QE4, and but that's not going to help. And if they do it, everybody's going to be so freaked out that none of the other stuff worked that they're going to sell. But do you think we could have this perfect economic storm begin to hit this fall, or am I too early?
No, it's absolutely happening now. And what's so interesting now in terms of political crisis and the economic crisis is the IMF chiming into the U.S. interest rate story. So right now, the IMF is saying, oh, gee, maybe in the U.S. you shouldn't raise interest rates. Well, that's a political crisis. Who's in charge of the United States? That's also part of the economic crisis that's unfolding. As you said, the timing right now, the IMF is saying, gee, don't raise interest rates, even though you're the Federal Reserve, you're independent. Gee, don't raise interest rates. We're really the leader at the IMF. You're not in charge of the world economy anymore. So that's a political crisis, sort of first wave. And it's maybe the second or third wave of the economic crisis. These crisis points aren't just one-day events. They're a process. So this is the process in 2003 that I saw we were going to have that mortgage crisis. And then it takes some years to unwind. So now the political crisis is going to add a wave into the economic crisis. And then it will be a geopolitical crisis after that. So all these things are sort of adding up, and they're cumulative, whether or not we see a flashpoint.
Well, let me ask you this about the U.S. dollar. A lot of people, if this political crisis happens, will people just sell these? I don't know. At least John Williams says there's at least 16 trillion liquid U.S. dollars assets outside the country. Will people take a look at what's going on in America and sell, and have this big spike in inflation, this big flood of dollars? Is that what you think could happen? As a Bill, I just had Peter Schiff on. He said, I think we're going to have a dollar crisis. I think there's going to be a crisis in the dollars. Does that play in with your political crisis? I mean, it's a con game, right?
Well, it's an absolute con game, and what's right now is everyone is involved in the great con, and right now there's countries and oil money which hold a lot of U.S. stocks and equities. These things called sovereign funds. They have tremendous amounts of money in the U.S. stock market, and we can see now that the pension plans are going to be stolen from people. That's pretty much obvious to everyone. With the new Supreme Court ruling, that's sort of an advance indicator that your retirement money is going to be gone. It's going to be confiscated. And gold looks very unattractive in the markets. And that's one of the places that you should actually go to. Now, in my talk with you, I said you need a stack of $20 bills.
Yes.
But you also need gold.
And silver.
Silver to the extent that you can carry it. My experience in the flood, and maybe behind me you could see some of the water line where I had to replace the sheetrock. But if you look at silver, it becomes untransportable in
gets
large
bulky.
quantities. It gets really bulky.
10 monster boxes as opposed to 100 gold coins is,
Well, even 100 gold coins is pretty heavy to move around.
you can actually put 100 gold coins, 5 rolls of 20 in your pocket, I think.
Yeah, right.
And so that's not like 5 monster boxes with 500 coins in.
Yeah, but what do people?
But you're saying, let me just back up here. So you're saying, listen, it may look unattractive, gold and silver, but at the bottom's in. We're going to have, this deflation they're talking about. You're saying that we're going to have a currency crisis. You're with Peter Schiff, because we're going to have a political crisis. We will have a currency crisis.
Definitely, we'll have a currency crisis. But right now, everyone is pregnant with U.S. paper. Everyone's pregnant with U.S. Debt. Everyone is pregnant with U.S. stocks. Specifically the sovereign funds. They own everything. And right now we're so pregnant with debt that it's being sold out to people in crowdfunding. You could buy people's credit card debt right on a Lending Club website. That's how ridiculously stupid this economy has become. And not only do we have criminals in Wall Street, but this great criminality in Silicon Valley. And even more so than Wall Street, and no one really considers that. But right now, what do people value? They value Bruce Jenner's sex change. Do you value the U.S. dollar? Do you value the FIFA controversy? Or do you value your children? Do you value living in a free country? Do you value a world that's stable and doesn't have war and potentially an atomic war? And that.
One of the things you said, and I can't get every point in your presentation, I'm going to kind of condense it here, but one of the things just hit me is that the U.S. is prepared for the wrong war. And you say war is coming. First of all, is global war coming in your mind?
Well, I think there's going to be 2 phases to the war. And I was very specific in my presentation with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. This is how the war is going to unfold. Now, there might be skirmishes in the South China Sea. There might be skirmishes in the Middle East. But right now, China is going to win the war without firing a shot. They're going to win the war and then fight the war. The U.S. is going to wander into war and then worry about how to win it. And a lot of the U.S. arsenal is just absolutely unusable. The U.S., under the Rumsfeld doctrine, has hobbled its ground forces. Through technology, it could fight a very short war reliant on air power. But what China's going to do is they're going to use ground power. And they're going to go right around the U.S. military strength. And were they to capture Korea and to bomb southern Japan, which they would be more than happy to do, they would eventually have mastery of the sea. See, the U.S. thinks that we're going to fight an air and sea battle. China's going to say, no, we're going to go around your wall of air and sea. We're going to go right to land. We're going to play to our strengths, and we're going to play to your weakness. And then there's a question of what weapons can the U.S. use? Do you think the Chinese would tolerate their mainland being bombed? Do you think that even a Doolittle raid on Beijing or Shanghai, do you think they would really tolerate that? So what China is doing now is they're building islands in the South China Sea and elsewhere. You look where those places are on the map. They're very far away from China's strength, the land empire. So what they're just doing is sort of building aircraft carriers out in the sea for future use. They're sort of pushing the tiger and saying, gee, let's have a little confrontation here and there. Give me the justification to do what I need to do on the land. That's what the South China Sea is about. It's not about fighting a war in the South China Sea. That's what the U.S. would like to do. Instead, what the Chinese would like to do is rebuild the land empire, the manifest destiny, of which Korea is not a part. It's just the strategic key to the whole equation.
I just want to circle back to Russia. You think that they'll ultimately double-cross Russia, kind of like Hitler double-crossed Stalin. They'll double-cross Russia, and they'll invade on their eastern front on China's northern and western front, correct?
Oh, correct. And there's actually a map which I provided, which shows you what Chinese manifest destiny looks like. And China
which is taken over most of 6 or 7 time zones of Russia.
Right, and if you look at the Boxer Rebellion, all of the major powers, including Japan, and Russia, were all there in China's backyard, and all these foreign devils are going to be excised. And this comes at a time where, Islam is going to really challenge, as an ideology, challenge some of the stability of Europe. And then the economic crisis is going to challenge some of the stability of Europe. So I see sort of like Poland and Germany trying to salvage the situation for themselves in stability. But a lot of the countries in Western Europe are just going to become unglued internally, economically, politically. And the U.S. may pull itself together, but it's going to be fighting with Japan. And then to what extent? What extent can it actually fight with a military that's not aligned to the task, and with an enemy that would take the bombing of its mainland very seriously, total war very seriously?
Well, wouldn't we go full nuclear on them then? Wouldn't we be forced to nuke the daylights out of them? I mean, I'm not a proponent of that. I'm just trying to analyze what would happen. Wouldn't that be something that would happen? And wouldn't they want to nuke us the hell back?
Well, that's how I came to my conclusion that the U.S. is going to face a crisis in politics, because the decisions that the U.S. needs to make currently to avoid war, to rectify the economy, to restore law, none of those decisions can be made. So when those decisions aren't made, if they can't be solved, then the problem gets worse. So for the problem to get worse, we're in a crisis of politics. And then in a crisis of politics, who exactly is making the decision? Who understands what war is? Who understands what the nuclear war is? And who is there to prevent it? Who thinks that they're in charge? And that's why we're rolling from an economic crisis into a political crisis. And you would expect people to take corrective action. You saw how difficult that was in the financial crisis. You saw how difficult that was going to war with Iraq. You saw those sort of convoluted decision-making processes. You saw the hurricane that we had, not Sandy, but Katrina, how the response was. And all these things are an inability to have any leadership. So when that reaches a boiling point, that's when you have a political crisis. When you have a political crisis, that's when you have more uncertainty, and that's when there's less understanding. And because the U.S. had a manifest destiny, much of our history is wrong. I mean, you don't know that the Soviet Union invaded Finland. Nobody knows that, and that's sort of or took over Finland. No one understands that. And that's why we're only looking at things through our eyes. And even after World War II, nobody really understood the bomb.
But you definitely think, I'm just going to hit this economic crisis. I want to kind of zero in on a few bullet points. But you definitely think the dollar is going to get trashed. People are going to sell dollar assets because of this political crisis.
Well, ultimately, I mean, what's the dollar worth? I mean, it's a good faith and credit of the United States. What's that worth in a political crisis?
You're saying that's going to be a key trigger event. Why you're saying you need to have gold, you need to have
right. I mean the overall context right now is deflationary because there's so much debt that can never be repaid. That is a deflationary context. But ultimately, what good is a dollar or currency that's not backed up by anything that's tangible, by law, by politics, by a military? Those are all the things that are collateralizing the currency. So all those elements are gone. So ultimately, what's the dollar worth? Now, am I telling you to buy gold as a trade? No. Am I saying gold could go to $700? Well, maybe. But who cares? Because ultimately, over a series of years, if you can hold on to it, it will remain.
It'll be constant.
Correct.
So you're saying not a trade, it's an insurance policy. That's what I tell people. It's an insurance policy. It never expires. I have a friend of mine that he's doing something different. He is, and I think, well, this isn't really a bad idea. A friend of mine, he says, listen, all my cars, I put new tires on. All my vehicles, I put new batteries in. I put new fixtures in my house. I got new doors. Everything's on sale. I'm going to get everything because when this thing gets freaky, you're not going to want to have something break down in your home. You're not going to want to have to go out and buy something. Is he crazy? I think he sounds kind of smart.
Well, I don't know. I mean, this event is bigger than anything that any of us have ever seen. I mean, it was certainly unpleasant when Alexander Haig said he was in charge of the country for a day. what if that went on for weeks or months?
People don't understand who Alexander Haig is. Younger people, he was a supreme weasel. It's frightening for him to be in charge. He was he's not going to be looked favorably in history for the people, for democracy. Alexander Haig. Just want people to understand that he was a weasel.
It could have been just a misstatement. I mean, he was part of the Nixon administration, and then under the Reagan administration, he was in front of the press. He says, "Look, I'm in charge," and that single statement, caused a tremendous amount of uncertainty. The same kind of uncertainty that we'd see for every single day for a year, based on the current trend of the U.S. being in a leaderless position. It's something we haven't experienced, so it's a little hard to describe, but that's a working example that I could use. Or worse, the Cuban Missile Crisis, just who's in charge, or maybe someone like Curtis LeMay, and I've read Curtis LeMay's biography, and he's the fellow that worked with Robert McNamara in the bombing of Japan, and he may have wanted to use the bomb during the Cuban Missile Crisis against McNamara's reason. So you don't know who exactly in times of crisis will be in charge of your government, especially now because you don't know who your government is.
And they let the bankers run wild, and the mainstream press is about worthless. Nobody can ask, hey, how come nobody goes to jail?
Right.
I mean, but I want to move on to one last thing. I want to get into. I don't do a lot on this because there's not a lot of clear that I can see sourceable information in this analysis, and I don't like passing off analysis as proven fact. But this is analysis. What do you make of the Jade Helm thing? What do you make of this? What is it? Dominance over humanity. That's their creepy slogan, and they have this big drill. What do you suspect is going on in your opinion, your analysis?
I really haven't been looking at that. I think the media is looking at that issue, and that's one of the reasons why I'm not looking at it. Frankly.
You don't think much that it's much to do about nothing, is what you're saying?
Correct. I mean, Ebola was another item. I was on your show and we talked about Ebola.
Yeah.
And I didn't think very much of that, and this sort of is the same in the same.
So you think Jade Helm might just be some smokescreen, some nothing.
I think it's basically what does all this apparatus do? Basically, what does a security apparatus do? Well, they spy. Something like cybersecurity, for example. There's more talk about cybersecurity than there are cybersecurity threats. There's more media play about Bruce Jenner than there is relevance to Bruce Jenner. There's more talk about LGBT issues than there is relevance. What there is not occurring are the press asking questions.
Real questions about real problems.
Real questions. So that's why we're doing an analysis, because we have no choice but to ask questions that the press is not asking, and then answer them the best way that we can. And the way that I do that is based on history and trend. So I'm trying to say, okay, what if this happens? What if this happens? It's almost like a planification. What do the cycles look like? What does history look like? What were people thinking from a lot of different perspectives? I've read a lot of biographies, and that's one way to understand what's going to happen in the future. Or look at the map, for example.
Should people prepare, buy food, buy water, gold, silver, get their money out of banks, have a stack of $20 bills, as you said? Should people be doing things like that? Is that something constructive for people to kind of do to cushion themselves if there is a flashpoint event where all the banks are closed or the bank holiday or whatever? Should people be doing that? Does that help?
Well, sometimes, when I go swimming in the ocean, sometimes I have to duck under a wave. This wave may be just too large to duck under. And I think that's what these large events are. I think that we're seeing some large events, the likes of which you and I haven't seen and haven't been seen in generational memory. At least 80 years. 80 years would be a total generational memory. We haven't seen what a world war looks like. We really haven't seen what a Great Depression looks like. We haven't seen any political crisis. We haven't seen total lawlessness, and these are all the things that are happening. So flexibility would be the best way to answer that question. I think. The more flexible you can be. And it's more important for your children than it is for you or I because of our demographic. I think in the Soviet collapse, there was a tremendous loss of life from a life expectancy perspective, and I expect that to happen here. So if you're 20 years old, let's say, you could lose 20 years of your life. If you're 70 years old, are you going to only lose 1 or 2 years of your life? So that's the kind of thing that we're approaching. People are going to lose between 20 and 50 years if they're 20 years old today. That's what's going to happen to them.
Warren Pollock, we didn't cover all your points, but covered a lot of them. There's a link afterwards where you can see his bullet point, his fine work. And again, you're not selling anything. You don't have a website. I mean, this is just pure analysis. And everybody, this is why everybody liked you the last time. I had comments. People said, "Oh, wow, he's not selling anything. He doesn't. Just giving us some information." Yes, that's right. Warren Pollock, thank you. I hope you come back again. Thank you very much for joining us today on USAWatchdog.com, sir.
Thanks, Rick.